Farmers, trust is everything. At Genesis Fertilizers, we're not just proposing to build a facility, we're building a future designed for you. With real progress already underway, we're closer to providing Western Canadian farmers with a reliable, locally produced fertilizer supply. Now is the time to take control of your farm's future. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CJME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hopefully you had yourself a great week. It is December 21st, everybody. You are running out of days to get that Christmas shopping finished and all taken care of. For those of you that are similar like me, it just means we got to get started soon. Not just complete it, but actually get things started and in motion. Hope you had yourself a great week. This is a great time of the year, of course. There's lots of people celebrating, getting ready to get together with friends and family and share some great time together. But we still got, this has been a busy week in Canadian politics and agriculture. So we're going to wrap up this week as best we possibly can. We're going to hear from Aaron Goertzen. He's a senior economist with BMO. They put out a new report looking at some of the key trends that are impacting agriculture in 2025, the year ahead. We'll get to that. We've also got a product spotlight today with Bryce Geisel of Koch Agronomic Services. We're going to talk all about WOLF TRAX, and I got a bit of your feedback and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Hey, if you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. We're going to talk about today some new data. We got a new Mind Your Farm Business podcast coming out, and it's with Eugene Ng of MNP. He leads MNP's cyber security division. And we got some interesting results as it applies to cybersecurity and farmers. Okay, so we'll talk about that at the back end. I got some data for you at the back end of the show today. What a crazy week in Ottawa. Yes, at the time of me recording this, we still have Prime Minister Trudeau. We're just about to find out what the cabinet shuffle looks like. So if a whole bunch of events have happened in the meantime, I apologize, and we'll break it all down next week. But what we know right now is the Prime Minister is going to do a cabinet shuffle, and we've seen part of that this week. Dominic LeBlanc is the new finance minister. Chrystia Freeland's resigning on Monday morning, the morning of the fall economic statement. That's coming after the previous Friday last week, where apparently on a Zoom call, she was asked by the Prime Minister to step aside because apparently he was trying to put former Bank of Canada chair Mark Carney in the position. Well, since then, Freeland has resigned. Carney said he doesn't want the job. And now Dominic LeBlanc has another portfolio on top of some of the things that he's already doing. And a lot of the business community in Canada kind of questioning and wondering, hey, Mr. LeBlanc does not really have the financial background, not his strong suit. This is concerning. And what's really concerning is the fact that the government outlined that in the fall economic statement on Monday, that we've got a deficit of over $60 billion. Now, just to remind you, that's about 50% more than they were forecasting, because I think it was $42 billion that they were thinking originally. So we definitely overshot the moon on that one. So not a positive. And we were seeing the Canadian dollar, unrelated, but we're seeing the Canadian dollar really move lower, which is in some ways for exportable commodities, like, for example, canola, or, soybeans, but probably a better one. Wheat, as an example. Cattle, pork. There's upside on the currency exchange because Canadian dollar is worth less relative to the U.S. dollar, and we're priced in U.S. dollars on many of those commodities. But boy, when it comes to machinery and other things that are produced in the U.S. that have to come into Canada, very expensive. If you're doing any sort of conversion right now from Canadian dollars to U.S. dollars, pricey. pricey indeed is a good way to put it. So it's we got some challenging times in Q1, and whether or not we have an election or not, time will tell on that one. But the Prime Minister's approval rating, I think, is down to like 17%, according to Abacus data. So not exactly a popular Prime Minister at this point, but he is holding on. As Wilson Phillips said, hold on for one more day. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to Aaron Goertzen of BMO right after this.
Maximize productivity and profitability with an innovative all-in-one approach to farming. Combining accounting, business planning, agronomic field planning, and advanced technology, MNP Ag Intellect delivers personalized solutions that empower you to make confident, data-driven decisions. Visit mnp.ca today.
If you're serious about agriculture, RealAg's got you covered.
For over 10 years, we've listened to and shared what producers have to say about everything from policy to agronomy from coast to coast.
Keep up with the latest in Canadian agriculture at RealAgriculture.com through daily newsletters and check out our YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us in the RealAg community as we continue to cover and serve North American agriculture.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
An exciting new event is coming to Saskatchewan mid-January. The Sask Crops Forum will include Commission annual general meetings, 4 keynote sessions, plus extensive networking opportunities. Registration is now open. Visit Sask Canola to learn more.
As everybody knows, there's a lot of trends and variables that are impacting farmers and ranchers across the province. Recently, BMO put out a trend report identifying some of the key trends, things to be aware of heading into 2025. On the Real Ag Radio podcast, I had a chance to talk to one of the authors of that report. It is Aaron Goertzen. He's a senior economist with BMO. Here's that discussion.
Doing great. Pleasure to join.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, okay, so there's 9 trends identified, and I'm going to read them out first, and then we'll hit on some of them. So, trend number 1, world economy holding up. Trend number 2, abundant crop supplies, livestock looking a little leaner. We have trend number 3, low-flying loony. Oh, that hurts any of us that are thinking about a U.S. holiday. Trend number 4, expensive inputs. Some of that's related to that dollar. Trend number 5, interest rates coming down the mountain. Yes, indeed. We have trend number 6, looser labor market. Trend number 7 is trade turmoil. Our audience is no stranger to that. And we have trend number 8, continued climate concerns. And finally, trend number 9 is productivity growth. Prodigious?
You got it.
Oh, okay, there you go. Okay, well, maybe have to circle back on what the heck that means. Okay, so as we look at these 9 trends, Aaron, there's a lot. Farmers are having to deal with a lot of things completely out of their control.
Yeah, it's absolutely right there. I mean, farming, even in we'll say the best of days or normal times, can be a pretty rocky affair. But there has been a lot happening on the macroeconomic front, on the geopolitical front, even a little bit closer to home on politics. So a lot of turbulence out there and a lot of different forces affecting the industry right now.
Now, do some of those trends trump some of the others, so to speak?
Yeah, it's fair to say that some are longer term, some are shorter term, some are more geared toward demand and supply. I would view falling interest rates in an environment of still pretty reasonable global economic growth as a real key for the near term, as far as demand and as far as pricing and farm finances. Obviously, with some offset from the fact that input costs still quite high and crop prices not as strong as a couple of years ago. So, again, a lot of moving parts, but some do trump others, it's fair to say.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on this show about some of the concerns about where commodity prices are. But at the same time, those inputs have been a little bit sticky. I'm probably underscoring that I'm understating that for a lot of our listeners. But a lot of concern. We looked at our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index going back to October. What are you concerned about? Commodity prices, input prices. Those are the two things that are more than everything else.
Yeah, for sure. And you see it in the data. When you look at, for example, Statistics Canada's measure of farm input prices, it's up about 35% over the past 5 years, and it hasn't reversed course at all, even as energy prices have come down, fertilizer, select inputs have come back a little bit closer to earth, but that's been an offset in other areas. Obviously, the weak loonie making imported equipment costs significantly higher, and so we've seen farmers, crop farmers in an environment in particular, where there's been no relief on input costs, even as selling costs, crop prices have come down on somewhat stronger global supply and a few pretty strong global harvests.
Yeah, trade turmoil was trend number 7, like I mentioned, and a lot of this centers around what happens post January 20th after the inauguration, and we see the second trip to the White House for incoming President Trump. Any indications or foresight from the very, very smart people at BMO in terms of what this could mean for trade policy and how that impacts Canadian agriculture?
Yeah, one of the first things that economists, pundits will always say when talking about the possibility of a 25% tariff across the Canada-US border is that there's certainly an element of posturing at play here on the part of the incoming US administration. I don't think it's a reasonable baseline to expect that kind of a tariff to come into play, but it's still worth thinking about what might happen if you were to end up with that kind of a levy put in place. I think from a Canadian ag perspective, maybe an even more important piece is that even if we end up with something that looks like status quo trade Canada-US, if you have trade turmoil between the US and China, that could very easily spill over into Canadian agriculture. We saw this happen in 2018 with soybeans. China retaliated against U.S. trade measures at that time by restricting its imports of soybeans, effectively flooding the North American market with supply and depressing prices not only for U.S. farmers but also for Canadian farmers. So even if we keep things on pretty good terms with the new U.S. administration, there's a lot of risk if things get more challenging between the U.S. and China from the perspective of the ag sector.
Yeah, let's talk about productivity. That's one that is mentioned a lot in economic circles when we think about Canada. From your standpoint, why is the focus on productivity important?
Yeah, people focus on productivity, and it gets a lot of attention from economists because if you want to sustainably grow living standards, you have to grow productivity, which is the amount of economic output produced per hour worked. And this is something that Canada has been doing not a great job at over certainly the past 10 years, even over the longer term. We have relative, particularly to the United States, lower levels of capital investment in Canada. And that hinders our productivity, hinders our living standards. The reason I bring it up in this report on agriculture, though, is because if there's one standout sector of the Canadian economy, it is the ag space, where productivity growth has been 6-7 times faster the Canadian average over the past 25 years. Farmers are producing about 3 times as much output per hour worked as they were in the late 1990s. an incredible performance that speaks to all of the technology and expertise being deployed in the sector.
How long can we sustain that? Can that growth continue for a number of years going forward?
Well, even when you look at very long-term measures of ag productivity, and crop yields are a great example. It's an area where even over decades and decades, productivity growth has been very strong. So it's not a recent development. It's not something I would view as a flash in the pan. You just need to go to a farm trade show and look around at some of the incredible equipment and technology that's being rolled out into the space to see that this isn't a trend that I would expect to slow down or stop anytime soon.
Trend number one was world economy holding up. We have a forecast for 2024. Canada's real GDP growth will be 1.3%. You're forecasting a 2020, or sorry, yeah, BMO's forecasting GDP growth in Canada of 2% in 2025. That's under the world forecast, though, of 3.2. Is this trend a positive, or are we concerned about it?
Yeah, so it's pretty natural that growth in Canada and other advanced economies tends to be a little bit below the global average, which also includes a lot of developing countries where they're playing technological catch-up, and by doing so can post, as we see in China, very strong growth rates, even in a so-called bad year. In Canada, over the past couple of years, we've seen some pretty sluggish growth results, 1% range real GDP growth, even with very fast population expansion. I attribute that mainly to the high level of interest rates over the past couple of years. Canadian households in particular are quite sensitive to what happens with interest rates, given fairly high debt levels and mortgages that tend to reset much more quickly, for example, than in the United States. So that's been a drag on growth, but of course we are now in a falling interest rate environment, and heightened interest rate sensitivity is if anything a positive for growth when rates are coming lower. So with the Bank of Canada starting to effectively unshackle households and businesses to spend more and invest more, we do expect a stronger performance over the next couple of years.
So with that falling dollar, like we have seen, and you mentioned there can be some positives, especially for an export-focused nation like Canada is there a threshold, though, where that dollar crosses a certain precipice and it's like, oh, okay, we're in bad territory now?
Yeah, I would say the weak loonie is troubling because it's resulting from Canada's economic underperformance. Our economy has grown more slowly than the U.S. As a result, interest rates north of the border never went as high. They're coming down more quickly. They'll probably end lower. And so it's those factors driving the loonie that I think are the concern. The low loonie for exporters is a positive story, particularly in the resource space, but even elsewhere, it's a benefit to Canadian competitiveness. It does, of course, affect the cost of imports and imported inputs. And so it can, past a certain point, begin to weigh on levels of investment. And of course, from the Bank of Canada's perspective, a very low loonie is inflationary. It increases the cost of buying foreign goods. So you don't want things to get too out of hand, but at the same time, with the loonie where it is now, and it's not in uncharted territory, it is offering, I would say, a well needed support for the Canadian economy after a tough couple of years.
We've lost 4 cents and change, though, in a pretty short period of time. Since middle of September, we were 74 and a half ish. And you look at now, we're at the time of us doing this interview, we're at 70 flat, and we have traded into the 69 territory here today. So obviously the old trading saying of the trend is your friend, depending if you're importing or exporting, you're probably going to have a different opinion on this trend.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the accelerated pressure on the loonie over the past couple of months has been very much driven by the incoming Trump administration and some of the concerns about what might happen on Canada-U.S. trade. So there's very much a risk premium that's effectively being priced out of the loonie at this point. I think worth emphasizing, the loonie, of course, fluctuates through the business cycle and depending on the market's perception of risk in Canada and elsewhere. There is ultimately a tethering point around purchasing power parity, a longer term equilibrium level that tends to be respected closer to 80 cents US. So I wouldn't say the loonie's on a path to get back there anytime soon, but if you want to talk, where do we head over the next 5 years? I would say higher is a more reasonable guess than lower. But in the near term, with the U.S. economy firing on all cylinders, with the possibility of more fiscal stimulus south of the border and all these trade concerns, I wouldn't expect that turnaround to happen in the very near term.
You can hear my full discussion with Aaron Goertzen of BMO, continuing talking about some of the big trends that are impacting agriculture in 2025 by going to RealAgriculture.com. We'll be right back here on RealAg on the Weekend right after this. RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Following is a paid-for product spotlight by Koch Agronomic Services. It's now time for a product spotlight, and we're joined right now by Bryce Geisel. He is with Koch Agronomic Services. Hey, Bryce, it is great to chat with you.
Great to chat with you too today, Shaun.
Yeah, okay, so a lot of exciting things happening at Koch, and the 25 planting and seeding season is going to be here before we know it as we get into January very shortly. Hey, when farmers think of nutrients, MP and K are at the top of the list for sure. Is there more they should be considering and thinking about at this time from a nutrient perspective?
Absolutely, Shaun. There's lots to consider in the world of fertility, especially it's hard to believe at December and we're already starting to think about that 25 crop year. But really, when we think about nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium as macronutrients, which are really just kind of the nutrients you typically need the most of when fertilizing a crop, there is another subset of nutrients. They're called secondary nutrients. This is where you kind of classify sulfur as, and crops don't need quite as much. And then we've got kind of another layer, a smaller layer below that, and these are the micronutrients, which are just as essential to crop growth, but needed at much smaller amounts. So common ones we hear about are boron, copper, zinc, and manganese, but there are others as well.
And I guess when we're thinking about the nutrients, like you listed, what's the why? Like, why are micronutrients so critical and important?
No, that's a great question. And micronutrients are very important because they're involved in all steps of plant growth. So without these available for the crop uptake, you would have a negative impact on your field and the crops in the field. Some micronutrients are needed for chlorophyll and carbohydrate production. So obviously that is an important part of plants and what they're doing, turn that sunshine into those sugars that we want. Some are needed for that root and shoot growth. So spreading those roots, digging them down into the soil, getting those crops up and growing are an important part. And some are needed for flowering, grain formation, and protein. So all kind of those key things that are important for the farmer's bottom line, getting that yield, off the field and into the bin.
And the key indicator here, like, how do I know? Like, how do I know if my soils are deficient in some of these micronutrients?
Well, there's really kind of two ways to look at deficiency. And the first is kind of that true deficiency. And that's where it's picked up in a soil test. So you send those soil samples in either in the fall or in the spring, get them back and kind of get that glaring red warning that something's real low. Or perhaps you get out and see symptoms in the field. So you're going out there and you have some symptomology and you kind of bring someone in, or you do it yourself and you kind of figure, oh, well, I'm a little short on this nutrient. These tend to be a little bit rarer in things. They do happen out there. So it's something you got to keep an eye on. But it's typically what I would say most people are familiar with in the terms of kind of that deficiency. Do I need enough micronutrients? And when you have something that shows up as that true deficiency where you just don't have enough in there, that is going to require a build program with your fertility plan for that field. There is another way to look at deficiency too, and the other way is looking at that longer term trends and your nutrient balance. This utilizes that uptake and removal that all nutrients do by the crop, so the crop's taking up nutrients, and then some of that's getting removed. So every year that proportion of those nutrients, whether macronutrients or micronutrients, it's going to leave the field in the grain. The grain's going to take it away, so you're kind of taking some of it away every year. And you might be in a situation where you're kind of going with your fertility plan, you're putting in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, some of those ones. So you're adding those every year, making sure those are going back in. But maybe you're not doing the same thing with your micronutrients because, again, you need much smaller amounts of those. So it's not really something that's often front of mind on people thinking. We know what happens. We don't put enough nitrogen or phosphorus down. We don't always think of those with micronutrients. So what happens over time is we start to kind of build that, we start to take that away from the soil. So we're starting to get those levels down lower and lower because we're taking away, we're not adding anything back in. There's going to be some nutrient cycling that's going to happen in the soil, but generally it's going to slowly diminish. And we might get to the point where we've built up all these other nutrients, but maybe don't quite have enough of the micronutrients in there. And that's going to kind of start to potentially restrict some of the yields you might see from those fields. So it isn't that there's this absence of the micronutrient and kind of that deficiency standpoint, but in comparison to those other nutrients the crops need, and there just isn't enough for that the crop is taking up. And that's going to have a potential limit on your yield potential.
So taking all that into consideration, how can farmers know they're choosing the right product given their circumstances?
When choosing a product to kind of address some of these micronutrient needs that you're kind of targeting, the big challenge is seeing that response. And that's going to really vary from field to field and even crop to crop. So different crops are going to have different amounts of micronutrients they're going to need take off the field. The soil textures that you see, we know micronutrients are heavily influenced by pH and other nutrients within the soil. So all those can play into it. So sometimes we don't always see that response on, across the board. So that's kind of looking at really a field by field case is a real good part to look with micronutrients. And then you have to kind of consider there are different sources of micronutrients, with some being immediately available for the crop. Others are going to provide more availability later into the season. So kind of choosing that source of the micronutrients can always drive us back to those 4 R's we hear with fertility all the time with it. And you may have to, consider the amount of micronutrient you're putting down in the distribution across the field. So one of these products is WOLF TRAX DDP, and it's from Koch Agronomic Services. Just a little explanation on it. This is a line of readily available micronutrients as a dry dispersible powder. There are a number of different nutrients you can choose from depending on your need, and you can add them into your current fertility program. And for anyone who's looking to manage the uptake and removal of micronutrients from their fields, or looking to increase availability and distribution of those micronutrients within your current fertility program, you can definitely reach out, talk to your retail, talk to your agronomist, talk to a Koch Agronomic Services rep about WOLF TRAX, see if it's a potential fit for what you're trying to accomplish on your fields.
Bryce, if somebody wants more information on micronutrients and how they fit into their farming operation, their plans for 2025, where do they go?
They can go to kochagronomicservices.ca and you can find information on WOLF TRAX and all our other products that you can get from Koch Agronomic Services.
Make sure you talk to your local retailer as well. Bryce, Absolutely. Have yourself a great day. Thanks so much for joining us here today.
All right. Thanks so much, Shaun. I'll talk to you later.
We'll be right back right after this.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomist, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Farmers' trust is everything. Genesis Fertilizers is making real progress towards providing reliable, locally produced fertilizer. Join the ownership group and protect your bottom line. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility.
One of the podcasts that we produce at RealAgriculture.com is called Mind Your Farm Business. It's brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. We cover a tremendous amount of farm management topics. And one of the big issues, it kind of came to light reading, some of the mainstream news. We've had a lot of companies, even agricultural companies, that have faced things like cyber threats and cyber attacks. And, we hear about some of these ransom payments out there in the news and the marketplace. And farms are also subject to these kinds of threats. It's always good to put yourself through a course or a seminar, maybe talk to people that are really in the know in terms of how do you protect yourself from cyber threats and increase the level of cybersecurity in your personal life and in your company. If your password or your PIN number is password, well, if your password's password or your PIN number is 0000 or 1234, you're really starting from ground zero. So you might want to get some help. But I actually heard a piece of data one time that like 80%, this is going back probably about, 6, 8, 10 years. There was like 80% of Canadians, their PIN number for their debit account was either 1234 or 4 zeros. Yikes. So what we did going back to the summer at Real Agri Studies, which is the market research arm of Real Agriculture, we asked some questions of farmers. And so this is what this new episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is all about. I talked to Eugene Ng, who is, he's their like cybersecurity expert. He leads the cybersecurity team at MNP. And we asked a bunch of questions. So I'll give you like a little bit of a tease on some of the things that we asked about, and highly encourage you to download the new episode that went up this week, Mind Your Farm Business. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, so what did the data tell us? How would you rate your overall level of knowledge and awareness of cybersecurity and the threats they possess? 50% of Canadian farmers and ranchers said, hey, I'm somewhat knowledgeable. 7% said I'm very knowledgeable. And 36% said, I have very little knowledge. Only about 8% said, I really don't know anything. And that's okay. We're identifying the issue. So if you're in the category, the 36% that say I have very little knowledge or I don't know anything at the 8%, you got to get started here because there's money involved. There's a lot of risks to your business. Has your farm ever been attacked or received a cyber attack threat? 82% said no, 9% said yes, and 9% said I'm not sure. What was interesting is that one of the things that Eugene says in our discussion is that he's actually surprised 82% said no. That's much higher than maybe some other industries. Overall, how would you describe the impact of this cyber attack? 42% said minor, 36% said moderate, and actually 10% said extreme. That's very concerning. So what are some of these cyber attacks? What are we talking about here? So there's a lot of different kinds of cyber attacks, okay? So here's some of the more common ones. Phishing, malware, ransomware, password attacks, inside threats. That's like where somebody that works on your team is actually like an inside mole and attacking your system. I'm not really sure is another option. We also had others. So the most common was phishing. And I was talking to a friend of mine earlier this week, and we were discussing, like, it's becoming harder and harder to really know. You get that phone call about, hey, your credit card's been compromised. And we used to think, oh, hey, it's not very nice. The credit card company called me. Now you got to kind of stop and think, is this actually the credit card company that's calling me? I had a friend who had a bunch of money charged to his card because somebody had pretended to be the credit card company. Malware was the second most popular at 25%, and then the rest kind of fall in line. So for some of us, we're like, oh man, I like when my password is like something common. You really should think about using some sort of password program to protect yourself. I think, a lot of people would say that that's pretty important. One of the things that's also important is maybe as you think about all this, is ask yourself, hey, do I have a cybersecurity plan for the farm? Only 16% said yes. 79% said no. Not surprising. Whenever we ask the audience about plans and things like that, the number is lower than you might want it to be. Doesn't mean people haven't thought about it. When I talk to Eugene, one of the key things to do is to get started. This is whether it's succession planning or strategic planning, or we're talking here about cybersecurity, is just get started, right? Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. So I think that's one of the keys we definitely talked about. There's lots of services out there that provide the opportunity to get some feedback on, how can I protect myself? Do I need to worry about protecting myself? Where are the openings? Where are the loopholes? Where are the opportunities for somebody to maybe hack into our system, or, in worst case scenario, there's a financial loss, and is there insurance out there that I need to be thinking about in this area as well? So highly encourage you to check out the new episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Rural Bank. It's with Eugene Ng. He is the cybersecurity lead at MNP. At the beginning of the show, we were talking about some of the things that have been happening in Ottawa this week. I did find it interesting that we had Francis Duran, who is the parliamentary secretary at AFC, him saying that it's time for Prime Minister Trudeau to step aside. But at the same time, we had Minister Macaulay, put his support behind Prime Minister Trudeau, which... So we're seeing the real separation. The cabinet and the caucus in the Liberal Party has definitely been having a challenging week, to say it lightly, I guess. The other big piece of news that we've had is we've got the sustainable ag strategy that has really faced some challenging times. Last week, RealAgriculture broke the story that 6 national cropping organizations were withdrawing from the committee, the advisory committee, and Cereals Canada, Pulse Canada, canola growers of CCGA, Canola Council. We're also now starting to see the livestock group. CCA has now officially put in their letter to the Canadian Cattle Association. So here's my view here, is that this is really low risk for these associations. Farmers have told us, I have the data to show that farmers see the sustainable ag strategy and environmental policies as a real threat to their operations. It's a negative policy. It's working against their interests. So for these groups to withdraw, I think they got the support of farmers. Will maybe potentially there be some concerns in Ottawa about it? And could there be somebody that latches onto it and says, look, farmers are against the sustainable ag strategy. That means that farmers don't believe in climate change and environmental policies. No, that's overstatement, and that'll be in the news a very short period of time. Farmers definitely care about the environment. Their actions speak much louder than any strategy that can be written on a piece of paper. There's a lot of sustainability programs. There's a lot of sustainable practices that we see farmers are engaging in on a daily basis. And it continues to improve. Now, that happens through technological improvements. That happens through practice improvements. What we do with livestock, how we grow crops. We're always trying to improve. And I had Brent Preston, who's the president of Farmers for Climate Solutions, on RealAg Radio podcast earlier this week, and they just put out a new piece of research that shows, again, farmers are thinking about the environment. They are thinking about climate change. But the main factor in practice adoption is return on investment. It's profitability. That needs to be a key component. You can't continue to try to push all of the cost burden onto farmers. It's just these costs roll downhill, and the farmer doesn't have any way to pass it on. I would love your feedback on that or anything we chatted about here today on the program. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. On behalf of everybody here at realagriculture.com, I want to wish everybody out there in the Real Ag on the Weekend audience, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We'll talk to you in the new year. Cheers, everybody.